Welcome to the Colleague Center for Effective Preaching Podcast. I'm your host, Tyshawn Gardner, Associate Professor of Preaching at Truett Seminary. I am here with Brent Strawn, Distinguished Professor of Old Testament and Professor of Law at Duke University. We are in for a treat today. We would like for you to like and share this podcast, share it with your friends, like it, share it with your neighbors. Good morning, Dr. Strawn.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah, we're pleased and honored to have you on the campus of Baylor University, and also blessed to host you at Truett, and especially with the Colleague Center for Effective Preaching.
I'm looking forward to it. Got to preach a sermon coming up and give a little talk, and
That's right.
Hopefully I'll survive.
That's right. I want to get right to it. First question is always, not everyone may not know who you are, so tell us who is Brent Strawn, where you're from, Paul's story, and all the good stuff.
I was raised in San Diego, California.
Okay.
From a young age, wasn't born there, but raised there since I was 3 or so, and so grew up around a Christian college campus where my parents worked, and in a Christian home where a church home where my parents also worked at church, and so kind of grew up in the Church of the Nazarene as the denomination, and felt a call to ministry as a young boy. Thought I would be a church pastor for most of that time. Of course, growing up, that was the primary thing one did with a call, and went to college there at that Christian college, was religion Bible major, and then just towards the end of that time when I was thinking about going to seminary, had a couple interactions with Hebrew and with the prophets and with a thesis project, and started making me think a little bit about academics. And anyway, went off to seminary, and eventually started feeling like the discernment of my call might be towards the teaching ministry, not local parish work. And that is, in fact, eventually what happened. So taught for 3 years in Kentucky at Asbury Theological Seminary as I wrote my dissertation, and 18 years at the Candler School of Theology at Emory in Atlanta. And I'm now in my 7th year at the Duke Divinity School at Duke. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I know that you've done some work with, I have to say, the legendary Walter Brueggemann.
Yeah.
And talk to us about early influences, people who've helped you open doors, and really who've influenced your work and your thinking.
Yeah, Walter would definitely be at the top of that list. I first read The Prophetic Imagination as a freshman in college, and years later I was moving some stuff around to North Carolina, and I found my old paper, my old college paper, freshman, and I Xeroxed it and sent it to him. And I said, "This is what 18-year-old Brent thinks about you, Walter." And he was very gracious, as he always was, wrote back. He said, "It seemed to me that 18-year-old Brent got the main gist of the book, you know?" And I figured that was even better than the A I got on the paper back in the day. But I would say a number of great influences on my life. I had great teachers, undergrad teachers at my undergrad institution, Point Loma Nazarene University in San Diego. And I went to Princeton Seminary somewhat on a lark. At least those of us in the Wesleyan tradition would say that. If you're Reformed, it would be providential. I ended up there, but ended up at Princeton Seminary, and ended up at really one of the great, at that time, Bible faculties in the country, somewhat unbeknownst to me. And the 3 Old Testament professors I had the first semester as an MDiv junior ended up being my dissertation committee years later. And so Patrick Miller was really my guy, my mentor, my advisor. And as it happens, Pat and Walter were brothers-in-law. Walter was married to Pat's twin sister. And so Pat was a huge influence. And then when I moved to Atlanta, Walter was just down the street at Columbia Theological Seminary, and I wasn't there but a couple days, and I get a letter from Walter saying let's have lunch, and so that's when Brueggemann became a more personal influence, not just an academic one.
Yeah.
But Pat Miller and Walter Brueggemann and other people that have really influenced me in terms of their writing are people like Ellen Davis, my colleague at Duke, and William Brown, who succeeded Walter at Columbia. Those are some of the people. But I have in the back, like those are academics who've written books. But there's these college professors who didn't really write books, and preachers, who were seminal, including the one that first introduced me to the prophetic imagination. He was a seminal preacher in our denomination, and.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of your work. One of the most interesting books that I'm familiar with is Lies My Teacher Told Me. Well, Lies My Preacher Told Me, which was influenced from the book Lies My Teacher Told Me.
That's right.
So what are the most common challenges that preachers make when preaching from the Old Testament?
Yeah, apologies to all the preachers out there for the title of the book. I do explain it, and I've had a number of great preachers in my life. I've really been blessed in that regard. I think that the fundamental problem that faces the Old Testament in lots of Christian circles, not all, some are far better than others, but is this sort of default assumption that the Old Testament is a far country or is a distant country, or the first lie I talk about in that book is that the Old Testament is someone else's mail. And unfortunately, lots of preachers think that. But even if they don't, people in their pews frequently do. And so overcoming that lie, that mistruth, is really crucial to figure out a way to inhabit the Old Testament as Christian scripture, which of course it always has been. It's had moments when its status as such was threatened, but it's always survived that, and the church has affirmed its seminal importance. So I think that's probably the most important one to kind of get straight, is that the Old Testament is in fact equally part of the Bible, equally important, equally worthy of preaching attention, equally worthy of theological grounding. All the things that we think of in the New Testament, they apply to the Old Testament as well.
Okay, that's good. So a follow-up question is, the African American preaching tradition is known for its prophetic preaching. Some would call it preaching, speaking truth to power. My own interest is in this social crisis preaching. This sort of draws from King's beloved community, Brueggemann's prophetic imagination.
That's right.
What do you think the Old Testament teaches us in particular about preaching prophetically in a world where it seems that injustice reigns?
Oh, yeah. It does seem that way. In fact, sometimes it's more than seems, right?
Yeah, right.
You mentioned King and Brueggemann already, and I think it's in retrospect, it's an amazing thing that professor of mine, this famous preacher in my denomination, who was a professor by that point, had us read the prophetic imagination. This was 1988. I was a freshman, and the schema that Brueggemann introduces there, I think, is exactly right and helpful in this regard. That the prophetic imagination criticizes the dominant consciousness around us, and that dominant consciousness he lays out, of course, through the Moses story and Exodus account, is the religion of static triumphalism. I've never forgotten it. Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt never change, and they want it that way. And how they want it is Pharaoh on top and everybody else on the bottom, and Israel on the most bottom. And the prophetic word criticizes all that and dismantles it. Dismantles the royal project, dismantles the structures of power, but does more than that, because then Brueggemann says it energizes to a new future. So the criticizing and the energizing are so crucial. I think we have a tendency to do one or the other, to criticize and let it stand there, or energize towards a vision that's not been sufficiently critical of the powers. But recently, I've been talking to a friend about this just last night. Recently, I've kind of resituated or remembered in part Brueggemann's key point about the criticizing beginning in grief. And so in one of his more recent books, he wrote, if you want to be prophetic, it starts with being sad, being just completely mournful about the world as it is. And so that's a really powerful thing to think about, that our sadness about the way the world is, our grief, even our perplexity about it, is maybe, it doesn't necessarily, but maybe the beginnings of something truly prophetic and profound that can lead to criticizing and energizing. So I think that's what I would think is a key help. The Old Testament gives us that in the prophets, particularly, of course, but maybe more broadly as well at the level of the entire canon.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said earlier about your own life, about calling, and at some point you discerned or made a conscious decision that the academy was the way that you would go versus the pulpit parish. And there may be seminarians that are in that tension right now, trying to decide whether to go into a vocation of church leadership or to go to school and get another degree in preparations to teach. What can you share with us about how you knew that it was one or the other? How did you knew that the tug was to the academy versus the church? And do those two merge?
Yes. Yeah. I 100%, I think they merge. I mean, I would want them, and I think I've tried intentionally in my own career to hold these things together, the life of faith, the life of scholarship. For me, therefore, being ordained was really crucial, and that happened after I became a full-time professor. In the way my denomination worked at the time, I had to serve a number of years as an educator before I could be considered for ordination. And when that happened, it was a kind of the final stage in a long discernment process where I thought, yes, my denominational home has agreed with me. The ecclesiastical adjudicatories, those people who must know God and all these things better than me, have said, yes, you have discerned this correctly, Brent. You're not just wanting to do this or do that. And so for me, actually, thinking about a change from the church to being a teacher was accompanied with a great deal of guilt and self-doubt. Was I discerning the will of God correctly? And what I've come to think about this in retrospect is two things. One is that I sort of did the Gideon fleece thing, I said, well, I'm thinking about this, but let's see, if I don't get into a doctoral program, then I know that's not the route. I got into the doctoral program and I said, well, if I don't get a teaching job, then I know that's not the route. I got a teaching job. If I don't get tenure, that's not the route, and it's always sort of, and that's to me still sort of an open-ended question, because again, my ordination now with the Methodist Church, enables me to go back to the bishop and say, hey, I'm done teaching. How about put me in a church? And the bishop would do it, So that process to me was helpful in sort of trying it out. There was feedback that I was a good teacher, and my professors were affirming this and whatnot. But it was also a healthy dose of self-doubt is good. And I should say the other thing is that business of the ordination was so crucial because it confirmed, and to me that was really the final and most important element, because it's just that my teaching career is in fact my ministry, and that I'm not a scholar and then I'm a preacher. I mean, I'm a theologian in the classroom or in the pulpit or whatever. That's what I do. And so the church changes. My church is, Tuesday, Thursdays, 10:05 to 11:20. And there's no altar call, but there's usually a call to action by the time. There's usually some preaching by the end. So those are the things I think, the self-doubt, the fleecing. Healthy self-doubt's good though when people are thinking about their calling.
That's good.
How am I hearing it right?
And I hear we don't discern that on our own. Other people
Yeah, 100%.
Speak into
Yeah,
that.
and people also plant the seeds, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when I was a senior in college, I had taken Greek because that's all they offered. You had to take that as a religion major. But I had this crafty professor, and he said, "I'm putting together a number of students to take Hebrew. Are you interested?" And I said, "Okay." And he said, "And by the way, I think you should write a thesis project." And I said, "Okay."
Yeah.
And he said, "You should write it on the prophets." And
Yeah.
I said, "Okay." And then I fell in love with the footnote, and he's the one who said to me, if you go off to seminary and you have it in you, it might be good to just think about the doctoral work. He said it might open some doors,
Yeah.
So he planted that. Frank Carver, man, in blessed
Yeah.
memory. He knew what he was doing.
That's right. Always good to have those voices of affirmation.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question,
right.
and I want to go back to one of your important books. In The Incomparable God, you deal with the nature of God. For seminarians going into ministry in a fragmented world where churches are often divided on the issue of who God is and whose side God is on, what do they need to know about God that can inform them how to lead people in the pews to live in a world that's fragmented?
Oh, that's such an important question at the moment, isn't it? Always, but maybe especially now. And I think the title, which was chosen by two students of mine who edited the book for me, The Incomparable God, I think that says it all right there. The incomparable. What you need to know about God is God's way bigger than you could ever possibly imagine. And when you think you got that, think again. It's even bigger. God's even bigger. It's even bigger than that. And so, the incomparable motif in the Old Testament is that, to whom will you liken me? Says God, there's none like me, and even names like Michael, who is like God, and that's that incomparable nature suggests God's largeness, bigness, beyond usness, and that's what's so crucial. God is not permissible to reduce to these small categories of my party, your party, my side, your side, and so that's what I would say is the most important thing for preachers to know is that God is really, really big. And when you think that, then think again, God's even bigger than that. And that means that God's a moving target, and it's going to be very hard to get God said right. You can't get God said right in one sermon. It's going to take a whole ministry, and then even that's not going to be enough,
And we can trust this God that's bigger than our imagination.
That's the most amazing thing about it, isn't it? That God who's incomparable and beyond all understanding has condescended to us in Scripture, in Jesus Christ, in the church, in Israel. And that's probably even more stunning and hard to get our minds around than the bigness of God.
Good. One more question. What is the just the biggest, most important lesson that you've learned as a professor teaching students in terms of the student-teacher relationship? What can you share with students and professors that may be watching this?
That's a great question. I thought recently in reading some Parker Palmer again about teaching that I've been struck with how the teaching event, both for the teacher and the student, is often one marked by fear. And I've seen this in seminary classrooms. I've seen it in doctor of ministry students that, for a number of reasons, we're afraid. The teachers are also afraid. And so partly what we're afraid of is saying something, I think especially for those thinking about ministry, they want to say something important, but they're afraid, they're afraid.
Okay,
and
that's good.
And I think, how to get around that is no easy task, but when it comes to saying things that are important, especially to connect back to the prophetic stuff, I'm reminded of an essay that Brueggemann wrote later in life, much, much later than the prophetic imagination, where he talked about the pastor less as prophet and more as scribe, who preserves the words of the prophets, who transmits them faithfully, who cares about them, curates them, nurtures them. And I think that's one way to get around our deep fear of saying something important. We've got to say something important, but thanks be to God, most of what needs to be said has been said in Scripture. And if we're faithful servants of that word, we don't have to come up with anything new. We just have to be a faithful scribe who writes it down, and as Jesus says, brings out of the treasure box things old and new, you know?
That's a mic drop.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you. Please share, like, and share this very important podcast, this interview with Old Testament professor of law, Dr. Brent Strawn from Duke Divinity School. Tune in next time for the KLC Podcast.